The first time Eli slid behind the wheel of my dusty old Honda, he adjusted the seat with such focus you'd think he was preparing for takeoff. I watched from the passenger seat, amused, sipping coffee that had already gone lukewarm. The parking lot behind the old strip mall was mostly empty, just a few faded parking lines, an abandoned cart, and the hum of a lazy Sunday morning. "Okay," Eli said, gripping the steering wheel like it might fight back. "I'm ready to ruin your transmission." I laughed. "That's the spirit. Just don't floor it into that lamppost, and we'll call it a win." He shot me a look mock offended and then glanced back at the gear stick. His fingers hovered for a moment, unsure. "You remember what I said, right?" I asked, leaning slightly toward him. "Clutch in first, then gently into first gear. Don't rush it." Eli nodded, cheeks slightly pink, either from nerves or the way the early light filtered through the windshield and warmed the side of his face. "You're really trusting me with your baby, huh?" I snorted. "She's not a baby. She's a 17-year-old relic with a cracked dashboard and no AC. If anything, she's a survivor. Like you," Eli said under his breath, but it landed with a strange weight in my chest. I looked at him, but he was already staring straight ahead, biting the inside of his cheek. We hadn't been together long, just a month. A few coffee dates, late-night texts, long walks that stretched past midnight. Eli was easy to be around. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it was usually something soft, thoughtful, or unexpectedly funny. We hadn't defined anything yet, not out loud, but something unspoken simmered between us. At least I thought so. "Okay," he muttered, "clutch gear, then ease off the clutch as I press the gas." "Exactly," I said, nodding. "Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast." The engine gave a stuttering cough as the car jerked forward and then stalled. Eli groaned. "Great start. You didn't kill us." "That's step one," I said with a grin. "Try again." We went through it again, and again. The car jerked, stalled, rolled awkwardly a few feet before dying again. But Eli didn't give up, and I didn't. Let him between the stutters and starts. We shared little glances, laughed when the car lurched, and once, when his hand accidentally brushed mine while shifting gears, he looked at me quickly, then away. I smiled, pretending not to notice the tiny electric jolt that zinged up my arm. "I think the car hates me," he said, exasperated. "Nah, she just needs to be seduced." "A little finesse," I said, and then instantly regretted the wording. Eli's eyes flicked toward me, the corners of his mouth twitching. "Seduced. Huh." I rubbed the back of my neck. Poor choice of words. "No," he said quietly. "It's kinda perfect." We didn't say much after that. He got better. We spent nearly an hour looping through the lot. He eventually managed a full circle around the cracked pavement without stalling, and I raised my coffee cup in celebration. "To Eli, conqueror of clutches," I said. He gave me a small, crooked smile. "To the world's most patient teacher." I shrugged, but inside, I felt a strange warmth. Something quieter than desire, but louder than friendship. He looked at me, then really looked, and for a second it felt like the air inside the car grew heavier, quieter, like the moment had taken on a shape of its own. Then he turned the key, and the engine cut off. "Well," he said, voice lighter, "I didn't crash us. Small miracles." We stepped out into the sunlight, stretching our legs and laughing about how sore his foot was from the clutch. But as we walked back to the passenger side, I caught him stealing a glance at me again. This time he didn't look away. Nothing had shifted, not officially. But in that soft Sunday silence, with the gear stick still warm from his hand, I couldn't help but wonder, what if it already had? The next weekend, we were back in the same spot, same sun-soaked parking lot, same old Honda. But something about Eli felt different that morning. Maybe it was the way his hair was messier than usual, or how he hummed under his breath while adjusting his seat, like he was more at ease. Or maybe it was just me, projecting something I wasn't ready to name. "Okay," I said, buckling in. "Let's try reverse today." Eli groaned dramatically. "Reverse? You're really throwing me into the deep end. You've got this. Reverse is just first gear with stage fright." He laughed, and the sound landed softly in the space between us. He tried to shift, but fumbled again. His fingers hovered uncertainly over the gear stick. "Wait, which direction is reversed again?" "Down and to the right," I said, leaning in. Here, without thinking, I reached across and placed my hand over his. Our fingers met in that awkward, halting way. His hand tensed under mine. I didn't move right away. Neither did he. It should have been quick. A simple correction, but we both stayed there. The silence between us filled only by the low hum of the AC and the ticking of the dashboard clock. I could feel the warmth of his palm under mine, cool skin, trembling just slightly. Then he looked at me. It wasn't dramatic, just a glance, a quick flick of the eyes. But his gaze landed on mine and didn't move. For a second, everything else in the car faded. Just the soft whir of the engine, the distant wind against the windows, and the weight of our joined hands. Then he let out a small breath, barely a laugh, and gently pulled his hand back. "Got it," he said, clearing his throat. I nodded like it was nothing. "Good." We practiced a little longer. Reverse, back into first. A few hesitant turns around the lot. He improved, steadier now, more confident, but I wasn't entirely present anymore. I kept replaying that moment. Not just the physical touch, but the stillness in it, the pause that didn't feel like an accident. "You okay?" Eli asked at one point, glancing at me while easing into second gear. "Yeah," I said too quickly. "Just thinking about how badly you're treating my car." That made him laugh again. "She likes me," she told me. "Oh, you speak fluent Honda now." "Just enough to flirt," he said with a grin. The teasing landed closer to something else this time, not bold, but not innocent either. After the session, we grabbed cold drinks from a gas station nearby. We sat on the curb outside, letting the condensation drip down our fingers as we talked about nothing. Eli told me about his sister's graduation. I told him about the new guy at work who brought tuna every day and nearly cleared the break room. We laughed easily, like always. But even then, the ghost of that moment in the car clung to the edges of my thoughts like fog. That evening, after Eli left, I sat on the edge of my bed with the lights off. My window was cracked open just enough to let in the warm air, and somewhere, outside, a dog barked half-heartedly. I stared at my hands, at the shape of them, the lines in my palms. I could still feel the outline of his fingers, how they didn't pull away, how he looked at me. I told myself it was probably nerves, that teaching someone to drive is awkward, and sometimes your hands overlap. Sometimes people look at each other weird when they're focused. It didn't have to mean anything. But the truth was, I'd felt something small, like a click in the gears when the car finally shifts right. I laid back on the bed, arm over my eyes, and tried to push the thought down. Tried to file it away under harmless, accidental, too soon to overthink or stick still. When I drifted off, I dreamt of the car, not crashing or stalling, just sitting still, engine humming. My hand over his, and this time, in the dream, he didn't let go. It started becoming a pattern, the subtle things. Little gestures I wasn't sure I was imagining. When Eli climbed into the car, he'd brush past me a little too closely. Even though there was space, his shoulder would touch mine for just a second longer than necessary. He'd smile, say something harmless, "Sorry, narrow car," but his eyes would stay on me for a moment, like he was watching for a reaction. I tried to tell myself I was reading into it, that maybe I was starved for connection and projecting feelings where there weren't any, that maybe I wanted it too much. But then there'd be another one of those glances, another light graze of his hand as we passed drinks or adjusted the cord, and the doubt would rise again, this time with more urgency. One night, we joined some mutual friends for dinner at a local rooftop place downtown. The air was warm, the kind of heat that makes people talk louder and laugh easier. The restaurant's patio was strung with golden lights, and the soft hum of a jazz playlist playing in the background. We sat side by side. Eli and I a plate of fries and a strawberry lemonade he insisted didn't taste like syrup. It absolutely did. At one point, Sarah, a friend from Eli's old study group, leaned across the table and smirked. "You two act like you've been married for years," she said with a teasing smile. I laughed, trying to brush it off with a wave of my hand, but my chest tightened. I turned to Eli, expecting him to groan or correct her. Instead, he blushed, pink rising up to his ears, and just smiled softly, eyes downcast. He didn't say anything, not a denial, not a protest, just silence. A warm, careful silence. And that was worse. It made the whole dinner feel suspended. I barely registered the rest of the conversation. My mind was stuck on that moment and what it meant that he didn't laugh it off like I did, or didn't. When we got back to my apartment later that night, it was late enough that the city had quieted down to a low heartbeat. Eli flopped onto the couch, stretching like a cat, and I queued up a movie we'd watched a dozen times before, just enough background noise to pretend we weren't thinking too much. He curled up on one end of the couch, head tilted back, eyes half-lidded. I sat on the other side, pretending to scroll through my phone, though I kept sneaking glances his way. Halfway through the movie, his legs stretched out and brushed against mine. He didn't move them. I didn't either. By the end, Eli had dozed off, soft breaths rising and falling in rhythm. The glow from the screen flickered over his face, his cheek resting against a throw pillow, lashes long against his skin. His fingers twitched once, as if dreaming. I just sat there, watching him, and feeling this ache rise in my chest, not desperate, not even physical, just a quiet, blooming want. The kind you don't know what to do with. What was I even hoping for? That he'd wake up and whisper something? That he'd roll over and reach for me like it was always meant to happen? I reached over gently and turned off the TV. The silence that followed was so soft I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock and the hum of the fridge. As I stood, I caught sight of myself in the hallway, mirrored the look on my face unfamiliar. Somewhere between scared and hopeful. I walked slowly toward the kitchen, needing distance, needing to breathe. But I paused in the hallway, leaning my shoulder against the doorframe. This wasn't how I usually felt around someone. Not this early, not this deeply. But Eli had a way of making things feel slower, more meaningful. And now I didn't know if we were slowly building something, or if I'd simply taken his kindness and spun it into a story I wanted. I thought of the times I'd caught him watching me, when he thought I wasn't looking, the way he smiled sometimes after I said something stupid, The way he held onto my hand that day in the car, just long enough to mean something. I didn't know where we were headed. I didn't even know what he wanted, but I knew I was in it. Was already in the middle of the road, looking back and realizing I'd left the starting line without even noticing. And I had no idea if Eli was still standing at the curb, or walking beside me, quietly all along. The night air was thick, hanging in the sky like wet cotton. It was the kind of summer heat that stuck to your skin, even after the sun dipped below the horizon. The city had gone quiet by the time we pulled out of my driveway, Eli behind the wheel again, determined to master the art of a smooth takeoff. He looked nervous, but not in the same way he had during his first lesson. This wasn't about the clutch or the gears anymore. There was something else behind his eyes, like a question waiting to be asked, but held back by fear of the answer. "I still think your car hates me," he muttered, stalling again as we tried to leave the neighborhood. "She just has trust issues," I said, offering a crooked smile. "Treat her right, and she purr for you," he laughed, a small sound that barely reached his eyes. We turned onto a quiet road just outside town, one of those back roads where the trees bend in, and the world seems to hush itself. There were no other cars, no streetlights except the occasional low amber glow, casting long shadows across the dashboard. "Try stopping here," I said, motioning to a small gravel pit, then reverse. Eli exhaled and did as told. The car jerked once, twice, then stalled. His hands dropped from the wheel as he slumped back into the seat. "God, I suck at this," he said, rubbing his face with both hands. I reached over without thinking and placed my hand gently over his on the gear stick. It was meant to be reassuring. It was supposed to be instructional, but this time he didn't just let it happen. He gripped my hand, firm, intentional, and didn't let go. The shift was immediate. The cabin of the car seemed to shrink around us, air thickening with something I couldn't name. All the bugs chirping outside, the breeze fluttering through the open windows, the faint sound of an old love song playing low on the radio. None of it mattered anymore, just the feel of his hand around mine. He didn't look at me. Not yet. He stared straight ahead, breathing slower, deeper. I could see his throat move as he swallowed hard. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. "You're doing fine," I said softly, almost whispering. Eli's voice came a few seconds later, quieter than mine, just above the hum of everything. "It's not the car I'm nervous about." I froze, my breath caught in my throat like it had been waiting for anything to make this moment real. The words hung in the air, and the weight of them felt impossible, beautiful, terrifying. He turned his head then, just slightly, just enough to meet my eyes, and what I saw there nearly undid me. Fear, hope, a flicker of defiance. Want? I couldn't speak. My mouth was dry, my body still. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. We didn't move. We didn't have to move. The closeness, the contact, the air charged with something electric, it said, more than words ever could. For one suspended second, it felt like the car had become its own world, a bubble untouched by time. Everything outside the streetlights, the road, the city, the past, the future faded. All that existed was this space, this silence, this heat between our hands. Then the moment passed, but not in a way that erased it. Eli slowly let go of the gear stick, his hand slipping away from mine like a final sentence that didn't need punctuation. "I should probably try reversing again," he said, voice hushed. "Yeah," I replied just as softly. "Yeah, let's do that." He tried again. The car stalled again, but neither of us laughed. We drove in silence after that. Not awkward, just full. Like we'd said something without saying it, and neither of us quite knew what to do next. When we got back to my place, he parked carefully, more smoothly than ever before. "Thanks for letting me drive," he said, unbuckling his seatbelt. "Thanks for not crashing," I replied. But the humor didn't land the way I intended. He smiled anyway. Before he got out, he paused, hand on the door. "Jay." "Yeah." He didn't turn back. He just said, "Tonight didn't feel like a mistake." Then he stepped out into the humid night, hands in his pockets, and walked slowly down the sidewalk. I sat there, a while, engine off, windows open, and I knew, without doubt, that everything had changed. I didn't hear from Eli the next morning. Not a text, not a meme, not even the usual blurry photo of his coffee with some sarcastic caption. By afternoon, I'd convinced myself I'd read everything wrong. Maybe the way he held my hand had been out of panic. Maybe his words were about the awkward closeness, not the kind that mattered. Maybe I had imagined the heat in the car, the silence, the way his voice trembled when he said it wasn't the car he was nervous about. I paced my living room like it might offer an answer. The throw blanket on the couch still smelled like his shampoo, something subtle, like cedar and mint. I sat down, ran my hands through my hair, and told myself not to text first. By sunset, I gave in. Me. "Hey, hope I didn't make things weird." Last night, the message showed as delivered. No reply. I left my phone face down on the coffee table and went outside. The heat had finally broken, and a soft breeze rustled through the trees. The sky glowed in shades of gold and honey. Everything looked calm, but I felt like I'd stepped on a wire and was just waiting for it to snap. Then, just after 7, a knock. I opened the door, heart thudding. Eli stood there, hands in his hoodie pocket, eyes unsure. "Hey," he said. Quiet. Hey, I echoed. You wanna come in? He glanced behind him, then nodded. Actually, could we sit in the car for a minute? I blinked. The car, he gave a sheepish smile. Feels familiar. Safe. So we did. We slid into our usual seats, me in the passenger side this time, him in the driver's seat. The air was warm, still, carrying the last light of day. He didn't start the engine. We just sat. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The only sound was the faint ticking of the cooling dashboard and our own breathing, uneven and cautious. Eli's hand rested near the gear stick, his fingers twitching slightly. I wasn't ignoring you, he said finally, eyes still on the windshield. I didn't know how to say anything without making it worse. Worse? I asked, heart dropping. He turned his head, met my eyes. I didn't mean to confuse you last night. I wasn't trying to mess with your head. You didn't? I said. I mean, yeah, I was confused, but not in a bad way. He looked back down, rubbing his thumb along the stitching of the steering wheel. I just, wanted you to know that what I said that moment, it wasn't nothing. I'm not always good at showing it, or knowing what comes next, but it meant something to me. The hum in my chest finally loosened, like the pressure had let go all at once. I nodded slowly. I felt it too, I said, voice barely louder than the quiet hum of the world outside, every second of it. His shoulders relaxed just a little. His fingers slid from the steering wheel, tracing the edge of the gear stick absently, like he was grounding himself. I reached over and rested my hand beside his. He didn't flinch. He didn't move away. We didn't grab each other, didn't kiss like a movie scene. Instead, he turned toward me slowly, and our foreheads leaned together softly, like gravity had finally decided for us. I felt his breath against my lips, not quite touching, close enough to feel the warmth of it. Eli gave the smallest laugh, shaky and embarrassed. This is weird, right? Completely, I whispered, but I smiled. He pulled back just a little, not breaking the moment, just enough to look at me properly. I don't want to ruin what we have, but I don't want to pretend either. I nodded. Then let's not pretend. His eyes glistened a bit, not from tears, but from the sheer effort of holding back everything he'd probably been swallowing for weeks. He reached out and brushed his fingers along my jaw, barely there, like he was asking permission without words. I turned my cheek into his touch, just for a moment. The sun had nearly disappeared by then, casting a golden wash across his face, catching in the curve of his smile. We didn't need to kiss. We were already saying everything. The car wasn't running. The windows were cracked. Outside, the world kept turning. Cars passed on nearby roads. A sprinkler clicked on somewhere in the distance, but none of it reached us. In that cabin of stillness, our world had shifted, not exploded, not broken, shifted, and sometimes that's enough to change everything. The change between us wasn't loud. It came quietly, like a new song fading in at the end of an old one. There was no grand announcement, no labels, just the soft, undeniable fact that something had deepened. We spent more time in the car, even when we didn't need to. Late-night drives with no destination, windows cracked just enough to let the air kiss our skin. Sometimes Eli would bring his playlist, sharing one earbud with me, the other hanging loose from his hoodie. Sometimes we didn't talk, didn't need to. The silence between us had changed too. It no longer buzzed with confusion. It felt lived in now, comfortable, like it belonged to us. He'd occasionally rest his elbow near the gearshift where my hand lingered, our fingers brushing like it was nothing. But every time, my pulse quickened, still surprised by how natural it felt. We weren't a couple, not officially, but we weren't just friends either. There was a quiet knowing in the way he looked at me now, in the way he touched my arm when he laughed, in the way he always waited for me to finish a thought, even if I didn't know where it was going. On one particular night, the city seemed to sleep deeper than usual. We drove up to an old overlook just outside town, the kind of place teenagers used to sneak off to. A quiet stretch of gravel above the glow of rooftops and streetlights. Eli parked the car, hands still on the wheel, the engine ticking softly. As it cooled below us, the city lights blinked like a heartbeat. Distant, unreachable, beautiful. We sat there for a while. No music, just the occasional whir of the wind and the faint crackling of the car cooling down. Our windows fogged at the corners, blurring the edges of the world outside. Eli leaned back, staring at the windshield like it was a planetarium. I never thought learning to drive would make me feel this alive, he said, almost laughing at himself. Sounds dramatic, huh? I shook my head. No, not dramatic, just honest. He turned to look at me. His expression wasn't soft, it was clear, like he had finally stopped hiding behind jokes or blushes. He exhaled and looked down at his hands. I think I always knew I wanted this. I just didn't know if you did, and I didn't want to lose you by saying it too early, or too wrong. I didn't say anything at first. Instead, I reached across the console and took his hand, and gently, without a word, I guided it toward the gear stick just like I had the very first time. His fingers wrapped around mine instinctively. We sat there, hand in hand, both of us resting on that old gear shift, right where it all started. The same car, the same seat, the same gesture, only now it meant everything. We stayed like that for a long time, letting the quiet stretch, letting the night settle around us. Eli smiled at me in that lopsided way he did when he was nervous and excited at the same time. I squeezed his hand gently in return. It didn't need to be more than this. Not yet. We didn't kiss. We didn't make promises. We didn't talk about what this was or wasn't, but the moment was real, full, and it was ours. Outside, the fog clung to the glass, and the city lights blurred below like stars in a puddle. Inside, everything was still, and in that stillness, I knew we weren't cruising alone anymore.